Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast and website dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another game week preview going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of game week 23. Now game week 22 is yet to conclude. We still have a couple of fixtures later this evening. I'm recording this on Thursday the 1st of February. It's also transfer deadline day. It doesn't really feel like it. Usually for content creation, that's one of the biggest faux pas is to go and record a podcast or write a blog on this day. But as it stands, and from the looks of things, it doesn't look as though the Premier League landscape is going to look very different when we wake up tomorrow morning. The deadline is at midnight tonight. There are very little rumours flying around, so I doubt we're going to be in for any particular surprises, not least any surprises that are going to be much for us to think about for our draft leagues. So yeah, one just to keep half an eye on, but not expecting there to be any major movements there. Now, as we're heading into a very tight turnaround before game week 23, the waiver deadline is just less than 24 hours away now. I'm going to try and keep this episode as trim as possible. So as I just said, I'm recording this episode on Thursday, the 1st of February. So any team news, injury developments or press conference information are up to date as of now and subject to change. Some of the players I'll be discussing in this episode include Timo Werner, Brereton Diaz again, Adebayo, plus many more. So let's get straight into it. So let's kick things off with a little look at the fixtures. And the place I want to start, because it's now very much on the horizon, is our first double game week of the season, which is now going to be in game week 25, because we have the rescheduled match between Manchester City and Brentford going in there. That game was meant to be played just before Christmas. City were obviously busy with the Club World Cup, so that's now going to be slotted into game week 25. Now for Brentford, that means a double of Liverpool at home and City away, which isn't the most appealing. And even before that, they've got Manchester City at home this week, plus a trip to Molineux in between. So aside from Ivan Toney, maybe not a great month for Brentford players, and I'll be looking to offload particularly their defenders. Any other mids you might have come by, I'll definitely look to get rid of them. It's a pretty torrid fixture spell for Brentford right through to the end of March, and then things look a lot better for them in April and May. City, on the other hand, have a lovely February lineup. They're away at Brentford this weekend, as I just mentioned, Everton at home, then their double is 2 home games against Chelsea and Brentford. They then finish off that month with a trip down to the South Coast in Bournemouth for game week 26. Now, naturally, Manchester City assets aren't going to be lying around, and for 8-team leagues, the only considerable players currently hanging around. So I'm setting the bar very high here. So these are players with less than 90% ownership. Grealish on 82%, Vardiol on 73%, Stones 71%, Rodri 62%, and Doku much lower on 41%. His ownership fell off an absolute cliff edge in game week 14 when he got injured, and hasn't quite recuperated to what it was yet. For 10-team leagues, it's pretty much those names again, but with much higher ownership still. So interestingly, Stones is well down with 58%, and Rodri's ownership, which surged massively after his haul in game week 1, has remained very strong, currently sits at about 93%. Which is no surprise really when he scored as many goals as Foden and has as many assists as Bernardo Silva. So he's been a very reliable pickup this year. The City defence in general, though, has to be one of the most frustrating owns this season. In the last 11 game weeks, which includes fixtures against Burnley, Sheffield United, Palace, Luton and Bournemouth, they have just one clean sheet to show for it, and that was against Sheffield United a couple of weeks ago. So whether you want to go in on that area is up to you, but they still remain very strongly owned. In terms of the fixtures for this week, the ones I like the look of are Villa away to Sheffield United, Spurs away to Everton, and Bournemouth at home to Forest. So there should be some players to pick out the waiver pool there. Now I'm just going to insert a little added section here because we saw a lot of players return this game week who have been out for a while for various, mainly injury reasons, to be honest. We've still got a lot of players away at AFCON who are due to return as well. But yeah, a lot of players we've been predicting their imminent comeback who have now finally made appearances again in the Premier League. The big one obviously was Erling Haaland, came off the bench, last seen way back in game week 15. There's not really much to say there. Anyone that had Haaland obviously have been holding on to him. We saw Andy Robertson again. He got 20 minutes off the bench last night. We haven't seen him since game week 8. Odsonne Edouard for Palace came off the bench. Again, we haven't seen him since game week 16. Lesser known one, but still for Burnley an important one. Zaroury got some minutes off the bench. We haven't seen him since game week 13. Obviously, just mentioned in that City chat, John Stones returned for a full 90. His first full 90 since game week 15. It's only the third time this season that he's managed a full 90 minutes in the Premier League. Another one, and a name I'll be mentioning in a minute again, is Taiwo Awoniyi. He was a half-time substitute. His first Premier League minutes since way back in game week 12. Jacob Murphy, he got a full 90 for Newcastle. It's the first time we've seen him since game week 11. His attacking returns per 90 stats currently sitting at a very impressive goal or assist every 42 minutes. So he's one who will be very much back on the radar now. And final one is James Maddison. Now, we did see him come on for a bit in the FA Cup on Friday against City, but that was his first Premier League start now since the infamous Spurs collapse against Chelsea in game week 11. Let's get into the main picks and hidden gems. So starting with Jason Steele, because it's always good to get a keeper in the chat if we can do. Now, I mentioned him on last week's pod because I was trying to work out whether or not we were going to see a bit more consistency now in the goalkeeping situation at Brighton. We'd seen Verbruggen start 3 in a row, not very successfully, and we'd then see Steele start 3 in a row with a couple of clean sheets in there. So I was predicting that we could now see a bit of a turning point with him keeping the spot, which he did. So it's the first time any keeper has started 4 games in a row for Brighton this year. But that has now come with a 4-0 drubbing away at Luton. Very flappy for the first goal. Caught out in no man's land for the second goal. Third goal, I mean, he was beaten at the near post, which I don't see as an automatic sin like some people do. And not much he could do about the fourth goal. So a very shaky performance there. His ownership did surge. He was up on the most wavered in list this week. So a concern for those managers, because now that would be completely up in the air, and I would not be surprised if we see Verbruggen back in for their next game. Into midfield, Michael Olise. Now his ownership in 10-team leagues is 78%, which is high, but there will be a few Michael Olise's hanging around waiver piles out there. Now, unless I misheard something, or the injury news was a sort of intentionally cryptic in the last week or two, I was worried that he could be missing for quite a few weeks now. But he looked absolutely fine on Wednesday. Very good performance. Showed just how important he and Eze are to Palace's fortunes. Now have 5 goals and 3 assists in his last 6 Premier League appearances, which is elite form, and he should be valued accordingly. I did tweet the Draft FC rankings today, and part of that really was just making sure that I was showing that value in Olise and nudging him up the list. Then in attack, Timo Werner, second start, second assist, and a much better performance overall, particularly in the second half. Really used all of his attributes for the assist for Brennan Johnson's goal. And yeah, I know we've obviously got the imminent return of Song coming, but as I said on last week's pod, I still think he's the fourth man there and will get plenty of minutes. Brennan Johnson looked far more comfortable coming off the bench yesterday without that pressure of starting the game. And so, yeah, I really see him continuing to be more of an impact sub, which is what he was meant to be this season. And so, yeah, I'd still hold pretty decent value in Timo Werner. I think he's going to get plenty of opportunities. And now Spurs are out of the Cup. It really is just the Premier League games to plan for. Kulusevski looked much better, stepping into midfield again in a sort of number 10 role, which does slightly improve the chances for Brennan Johnson. But even still, I prefer Werner to Brennan Johnson at the moment. And then another attacking situation is at Forest. So we've got Wood and Awoniyi now basically fighting for one starting spot. In 10-team leagues, Wood's ownership has shot right up to 87%. Awoniyi a bit lower in 65%. And a very interesting contest to play out over the coming weeks. Wood has been one of the surprise packages of the season so far. I've mentioned him a number of times, but Awoniyi's quality is really hard to argue with. And it wasn't long ago he was being mentioned in rumours of a move to a top European team, Champions League team even. So first half of football back from injury, already back with a goal, 5th of the season for Awoniyi. So his goal involvement is just slightly under 1 per 90. Despite that, Wood has still scored 5 in his last 5 games, and that is difficult to ignore. The problem is they have very similar profiles, very similar attributes in the way you would set a team up structurally, but Awoniyi just has the edge in that he's able to offer more of a threat on the run in behind as well, which Wood, although he's shown glimpses of it, I didn't think he had this season. It's nowhere near on the scale that Awoniyi can. I've been a big fan of Wood's efforts in recent months, but I do fear that his place could now be back as more of an impact sub in the long run. Into hidden gems. These are guys with generally less than 10% ownership, starting with Bradley for Liverpool. His ownership just 5% in 10-team leagues. That ownership actually dipped slightly ahead of these waivers with the anticipation of Alexander-Arnold's return. But what a performance, as he currently leads the way this game with 21 points, which I think he will still be on top of after tonight's fixtures. I guess the question is there a world in which Bradley carries on where he is and Alexander-Arnold is still able to get into the team as more of an out-and-out midfielder? I think there are definitely legs to that, but we'll have to wait and see, really. I think it's difficult because Bradley still has only featured in 2 Premier League games in his life. It's been great that he hit the ground running, but I still think there's no need for them really to carry on pushing it. They can use him a lot more as a substitute now, as a viable backup to Alexander-Arnold. There'll be lots of people jumping on the Bradley train this week, given how big his score was. It's an obvious knee jerk. I would still be reluctant. I think the likelihood is the next game Alexander-Arnold is in his conventional right back spot with Robertson on the opposite flank, and we continue to then see Bradley in the cup games and as a sub option. Another defender just to mention, and with Liverpool linked too, is Nico Williams for Forest. I don't think this will come to much. He's more just one to go on the watch list, but in the game against Arsenal the other night, he was basically deployed as an out-and-out right-sided midfielder. So if that continued, obviously he's listed as a defender, that could provide some very nice value there. The only issue is, I think that was more likely needs must than an actual, viable option going forward. We've got Elanga back now. Hudson-Odoi is back from injury. Gibbs White is fine. They're all fit. So I would be surprised if we see it again. But if we did see it in the next game, then that's obviously something that Nuno's considering going forward with. And as I said, he would then be an out-of-position defender, which is always nice. Into midfield, and Brereton Diaz as the other newbie that we mentioned on the last pod. His ownership, particularly in 8-team leagues, really didn't take off at all this week, just 3%. Now 2 goals in 2 appearances, will continue to play, and I fully expect his ownership to go up with tomorrow's waiver deadline. Some hidden gem strikers now. Let's start with the obvious one, which is Adebayo for Luton. His ownership is just 10% in 8-team leagues. In 10-team leagues, though, that is 64%. So that shows you where he's rated in those larger leagues and how the value really does change, going from a striker pool of 24 in an 8-team league to 30 in a 10-team league. There are lots of players that kind of drift in and out of that bracket in between. He's one of them. Very interesting ownership curve, actually, for Adebayo. I might post on some of the social media later. After his 2 goals in game week 15 and 16, his ownership shot up massively and has pretty much remained strong since then. A Premier League hat-trick he now has, and nobody can take that away from him. Watching his performance really was a reminder to me that players shouldn't be judged off of isolated performances. I obviously try and watch as much football as I can doing what I do with the podcast, but I'll admit I've probably seen far less of Luton than I'd like to compared to other clubs this year, and so my opinion on Adebayo comes from really a couple of shaky performances that I saw back in September time. So, judging by his minutes that then he got between game weeks 9 and 14, the assessment that I did have may have had some merit because he was very much out of the team, but he's certainly settled into the team now, and he's finally managing to use his physical presence to its fullest potential. And another one who I fully expect the ownership to rocket this week. The other one to mention, not with as much figure as Adebayo, is Amdouni for Burnley, who again has been a very reliable minutes man at Burnley. Just 7% ownership in 8-team leagues. Again, far higher in 10-team leagues at 62%. So I'm putting him in that similar value bracket to Adebayo, maybe just behind, but another one definitely to consider. The most hidden gem pick this week. Now, last week's most hidden gem pick was Ben Johnson for West Ham. So still hasn't played yet. So I've got no idea how to judge that pick at the moment. We'll obviously be keeping an eye on him later today. The one for this week, I found it quite difficult to choose this week. So I'm going for a returning face, a player who I continue to have a bit of a soft spot for. Scored on Wednesday night, and that is James McAtee for Sheffield United. 2 goals in his last 3 games, and an attack really that's starting to finally show some potency with the addition of Brereton Diaz. They've managed to score 2 goals in 3 of their last 4 games now, which is something they've only managed to do, I think, 2 or 3 times all season. The problem for Sheffield United obviously is at the other end, because they're also averaging, I think, 2.5 goals against each game. So that maths obviously doesn't stack up to winning or even drawing many games. So that's why they're almost certainly going to get relegated. But I think we can at least take some heart in the fact that they are starting to score goals. So the likes of Brereton Diaz, McAtee, McBurney, whoever else gets a run in the team, is someone worth considering if the fixtures look all right, particularly in larger draft leagues. So that is it for this episode. As I said, trying to keep it nice and trim, because we don't have long to go now before the GW23 waiver deadline, which will be tomorrow, Friday the 2nd of February at 11 a.m, ahead of the Saturday lunchtime kickoff between Everton and Spurs. It's just a normal game week this week, so games across Saturday, Sunday, and then the Monday night match, and then a normal week-long gap before the games kick off for Game Week 24 next weekend. So that's nice, and we can get back to a normal cycle of prep and content creation for you. So if you are watching this for the first time, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. If you prefer to consume your content on YouTube, I'm going to try and get as many of the pods out in video format too. Equally, if you're listening to this and that's not making much sense to you, then you can probably infer from that this is also now going to be recorded in video format, so you can head over there if you prefer to consume them that way. If you do like to listen though, the pods will remain exactly as they always have been. And if this is one of your first times coming over to the podcast, make sure you subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to so that you don't miss out on any future episodes as they drop. Of course, all of these stats that I mention in the podcast are exclusively available on draftfc.co.uk. If you've never signed up before, then head over there and use the code DRAFTFCPOD, and you'll be able to get a 1-month free trial to have a look at everything that we've got going on there. That gives you access to the squad planner, which has all of the waiver change percentages, free agent change percents, rostered. You can see those for your league. You get your global rank, which shows you how your league is performing globally against other like-sized leagues. You have the fixture table. You have the live game week stuff. You've got our draft rankings, so much on there. So if you've never gone and had a look, then please do so and take advantage of that 1-month free trial. Otherwise, best of luck ahead of Game Week 23. If you're listening to this, there is almost certainly going to be just a matter of hours before that deadline. So just go and pencil in any moves that you need to make now. And until next time, as always, stay sure.